Welcome to the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society. Welcome to ITSP Magazine. You're listening to a new Securing Bridges podcast. You're about to join Alyssa Miller as she sits down with senior and executive security leaders to share stories of success and failure while working across business teams. It's time to build and secure the bridge to the business. Knowledge is power, now more than ever.
All right, everybody, we're here. Sorry about that. It's been an adventure these last couple of weeks. We've had all of the tech issues you could imagine seem to have cropped up and bit us. But hey, we're here. It's me, it's Alyssa. We're here securing bridges. We haven't forgotten about you. So the fun of doing a live show. For those of you that were on last week, first of all, just a quick heads up. You saw, lots of struggles with audio last week. As a result of that, the interview or the show with Gabby, we're not going to be converting that to podcast. So if you went looking for the podcast audio only version of it, based on the audio issues, it just really wasn't worth putting into podcast. You can still watch the video of it. We're going to work on trying to have Gabby come back and join us again, maybe in a couple weeks or something. But like I said, live TV, it's a whole different ballgame. This isn't just your simple podcast anymore. So we're back. It's another week. We've got another episode, another amazing guest. Every week is an amazing guest here on Securing Bridges. I swear to God, we have had some incredible folks. And yet again, nothing's different this week. It's yet another amazing guest. I'm really excited to welcome today. It's Chuck Brooks. Chuck, how are you?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing wonderful. We had a little bit of a scare there coming into this with some tech issues, but we got everything resolved. We're going good. And Frank's already giving us trash in the, because we started at 4:04, so we're already getting crap for that. I love it. Oh, yeah. Thanks, Frank. Love you. Glad to see you out there. So, Chuck, welcome to the show. First of all, I just want to turn it over to you in a minute just to give us a little intro. Tell the folks out there a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you've been up to.
Sure. Yeah, I'm originally from Chicago, but I moved out to Washington many years ago and first served in the government on the Hill for the late Senator Inspector and technology issues. Later became one of the first people hired at the Department of Homeland Security, where I worked in the Science and Technology Directorate. And then I went on to industry, where I worked several years for some giants like Xerox and General Dynamics and cybersecurity and emerging technologies. And now I have my own company, and I also teach at Georgetown University, cybersecurity risk management and also applied intelligence, in a nutshell.
That's a very succinct nutshell. I love it. Awesome. So, the whole thing with Securing Bridges is really we love to identify and talk about those key ways that we're trying to connect cybersecurity to the non-cybersecurity folks, right? We're always trying to build those bridges. And, one of the things I know that was really intriguing to me is the work that you're doing at Georgetown University. You had mentioned, a little bit about your focus on, the cybersecurity risk side of things in particular. And I would love to hear a little bit more kind of what does that even look like in an academic sense as you're working with students who are presumably trying to get into a cybersecurity role. Oftentimes we think of like that infamous GRC term and kind of get, a lot of security practitioners kind of back away, right? So it was fascinating to me to see that that's like an area where you're really focused. So can you kind of dive into that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, it's a very rewarding experience, actually. It's a relatively new program, but it's got, I think the advantage of being in Washington, D.C., we've got a lot of practitioners. We have a lot of technical people. We have a lot of policy people. And we also have a lot of companies and government agencies that are paying, this is the graduate level course, for their people to get educated deeper in cybersecurity and information security. So we're getting a really good caliber of students, a lot of them on the GI Bill that have served in the military. And I think it's sort of a recognition by a lot of people in this area that cybersecurity is certainly a career path, but it's also an important security issue from the government perspective and also from the business perspective. And a lot of them are changing their careers, or they're already in it. And it's exciting to see where they're going with it, because I have to say, in the last couple of years, so much has exploded on the cybersecurity scene, with just all kinds of emerging technologies coming on board, like 5G, soon to be quantum. Now they're requiring quantum encryption at NIST, etc. So there's a whole lot of things to teach. So it's very exciting.
So you mentioned quantum computing. That's kind of interesting to me too, right? Because I think there's a lot of buzz in the industry about it. And, generally in cybersecurity, when we hear a lot of buzz, we get skeptical, right? Because, and I know that you touch on in your profile, you talk, the work you're doing around blockchain, and that's one of those, right? How many cybersecurity companies jumped on the word blockchain and put that just everywhere they could figure it out? And now we're seeing some of the same with quantum computing. So it's interesting to hear you say that that's something that really is on the horizon. How do you see that coming to play, and when? I mean,
well, I think when you're looking at quantum, you're looking at quantum technologies. So you have a lot of different things. Quantum computing is a little way off, probably closer than we think now. I used to think it was 20, 30 years off, but now they're making some material gains with new, with silicon and other things that are pretty interesting, and a lot of research is going into it. But there's quantum sensing, we use in MRIs. We use that already. Quantum encryption, which is now, as I just started to mention, that NIST just developed requirements that there be quantum encryption on algorithms that are being used by the Department of Defense and other agencies. So, those technologies that are nearby, we've shown some in quantum entanglement already. I mean, it's a complicated area because you're really talking about physics more than you're talking about anything else. But that part is here. So, I mean, quantum is going to be a long time in coming until I think we have enough ability to say that we could, decrypt billions and trillions of files or data immediately. But we're getting to that era, and we also have to recognize that China is putting a ton of money into this, billions of dollars, and they may have a lead on us. So we have no choice. So if you look at it from a security perspective, you need to invest and find out what's happening. And I think what we're finding out now in our computational era is that what we thought was impossible a decade ago is doable. So, you're right about the buzz. It's not here yet. Everything is, not quantum yet. Everything is not zero trust yet either. But they're sort of goals, and you have to, achieve those goals step by step.
So if I'm thinking like from a cybersecurity executive, whether CISO or someone high up in a senior role in a cybersecurity structure, how would you go about even talking about this quantum world to, say, your executives, your peers, the CEO, and whatever, who are hearing all this and really just kind of wondering where do we go with this? How do I, what should we care about? If you're that CISO, I mean, what are the things that you're focused on talking to them about?
Sure. Well, I mean, that would be included, but it wouldn't be a priority. I think the first thing, it goes back to risk management. If you're a business, particularly, you're targeted or potentially targeted. And there are a lot of immediate threats that don't involve a lot of complicated technologies. Phishing is still the number one way to get into a business. It happens every day. It's just fooling you. And the problem now is that a lot of it's being automated, thanks to machine learning and artificial intelligence, with other technologies that have made things easier for the attackers. So there's a lot of things there to consider. But, I'd go back to, okay, you need to have a risk management plan. You need to have a strategy. The first thing you need to do as a business is know where your vulnerabilities are. What data do you want to protect? Do you need to segment it? Do you need to encrypt it? Do you have firewalls? Are your employees, which employees have access? There's so many things to consider if you're talking to the C-suite. And fortunately, I think there's more inroads now than there was a few years ago, largely because so many businesses got hit. And that's mainly because of ransomware, because the bad guys figured out they can make money on this pretty quickly with cryptocurrency. So, I think there's a new sort of awareness out there that we need to take advantage of. And by no means is it really enough right now. There's so many businesses, particularly small businesses, have no idea of just basic cyber hygiene. And what you just said is, what do you tell the people you're working for? The first thing is that, know your attack surface, know your risk, and know the threats. So those three things would be the first things I would tell them. And quantum would be later on. If depends what kind of company they are. Look what emerging technologies are coming online. Artificial intelligence. There's 5G. There's quantum. Of course, Internet of Things, which is already here and getting bigger and bigger, which is another threat to supply chain. But all those things have to be reckoned with in any kind of company that's looking forward, because we're really in the fourth industrial era. We're moving to a digital world, digital transformation, and we're early, but all this stuff is happening very fast.
So shifting gears a little, you'd mentioned that now you're running your own organization, Brooks Consulting. And, from reading about it, it sounds like you're doing work both with some pretty large enterprise organizations. You mentioned Fortune 1000 clients, but you also mentioned you're doing work in the startup world.
Yeah.
That's got to be a really interesting juxtaposition when you're dealing with something, someone who's in that Fortune 1000 versus the startup land.
Yeah, it is quite a contradiction. I mean, the big companies, the ones that I work with, are all very policy oriented. They have a lot of strata in them and bureaucracy, as they should, as they're big companies, and they have liabilities and lawyers looking at everything. The startups are just basically, okay, we got a cool technology. What do we do with it, kind of thing. So it's really more like thinking and being creative. So it's sort of a balance there, because you're reaching a great audience and you actually have established listeners and viewers with the large companies, and what you do is taken very seriously across all levels of it. But with a startup, you're really experimenting with what the future is. This is a really neat technology. I think it's got potential, and you're trying to help people too, because everyone, I think, has at one point thought about doing their own business, and it's always fun to help people that are starting out, and hopefully they make it. And you may be part of it, or you may not be part of it, but it's always good to help those that are taking the risk, because that's what we are as an entrepreneurial society anyway. And without that, we're not anything. So,
Yeah.
So I split up my time for both of them, and it's a balance. And then of course the academia takes a good portion of it too.
Oh, I don't doubt it. I mean, honestly, really cool when you can get into that startup landscape and start to really, like you were saying, you see some of the cool new technologies people are creating. You start to see some of the ways that they innovate. And I'm sure you probably see somewhere, if you're like me, look at some of the things they're creating, you're wondering, like, I don't know if there's necessarily a market here, but all right, if you want to pursue it. But I guess, have you seen any growth, or what is your impression of how startups are handling the whole idea of cybersecurity? I think traditionally we think about startups and then, very early, maybe in that incubator stage or that early funding stage, security is like the farthest thing from their minds. Are you seeing that still play out, or are you starting to see those founders and maybe even their venture capitalists starting to ask more of the questions earlier on how do we start to ensure the security of our systems?
Oh, I've definitely seen a change over the last couple of years. It's not just me that's seen the change; it's the money, the VC that are putting the money into it. They're putting so much money into cybersecurity startups and technologies, some with valuations that are crazy. But I think they see the value of protecting reputation, of viability of these companies, and a lot of them also have business in both the public and private sector. And with the public sector, dealing with government, you need certain requirements. So if they see that market as a market for them, they're going to have security elements to it. But just generally, I think that everything is so focused now with just the Ukraine-Russian war, the worry that they're going to get attacked, businesses and critical infrastructure. All of a sudden, came all kinds of memos from government. So I think people can't ignore it anymore. And, I'm hoping that we continue with the investments in a lot of these startups that were really promising in the last couple of years. If the economy doesn't straighten out a little bit, it might dip. But there's so much potential out there, and it's sort of they're forging technology, between industry and academia and government, and I think that equation works really well. The public-private sector cooperation, and I want to see more of that. And I think it's the only way that the free world is going to actually compete, against those like with China and others that are just strictly pouring it in for security advantage.
Yeah, and that public-private sector collaboration is a really interesting concept, right? I mean, that's something we're seeing, heavily focused on by CISA. Jen Easterly was on here about a month ago. And we talked quite a bit about the efforts that she's doing, which seem to expand on, kind of where I think Brian Krebs. Let's get the right Krebs, the Chris Krebs. Jeez, I'm okay, I promise. Chris
Well, they're
Krebs.
both inside, but okay.
Yes, yeah, I mean, they're both have their plays, right? But I mean, I think that's where Chris Krebs was started, and then sort of election security sort of pulled their focus there. But that I would love to see that grow. And you mentioned that that you came from Homeland Security, you spent some time there as well. And I'm assuming that sounds like it was pre-CISA days.
I was one of the first people in. I was a plank holder there. When I went there, that was like I was operating out of a warehouse. So they were just putting everything together with the help of the Secret Service and Coast Guard, actually. So I was really in the building days with Tom Ridge. And it was very exciting because you see, my focus was on science and technology. So it was working with all the labs and working with all the universities and bringing in the experts in these areas. Although then cyber wasn't the big focus. It was more, chemical, biological, rad nuke, explosives rather than that. But that has changed, and that's since it was really built for cyber. And I'm really impressed by the job that Jen is doing. There is a lot of outreach to the private sector. There's much more awareness, particularly in the energy sectors and financial sectors on the threats, and the threat sharing is getting good. So a lot's happening, I think, in that area that really validates the reason for being for CISA.
Well, and how wild that they're now opening up an office in London.
Well, it's our great ally, right? It's one of our great allies. I think, the Brits, the Israelis have a lot of ingenuity they could share with us, in some other countries too, and the Canadians too. So I think the more we're in this together and cooperate bilaterally and multilaterally, the better we're going to get to security stages where we can protect ourselves better.
And it does speak to, you mentioned being in this together. I think there is more and more, I almost feel like we're playing catch up a little bit, right? I mean, obviously the need to address these issues at a global level has existed for a long time. I mean, you think about when did we open up the internet and things went global? How long did it take us before we started actually talking to allies and maybe not even our traditional allies? I mean, we can think in terms of, the Western European nations that we're all familiar with and we work with every day. But, even some of those countries that we're not typically, maybe we're not at odds with, but we're not friends with, it's, I think there's got to be a growth in that level of collaboration. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, no, I agree. I think with the exception of the major perpetrators right now, which are Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, most of the countries out there are in the same position. Because a lot of what's being attacked is not necessarily governments; it's their private sector, their banking, their businesses, and they're all being victimized by those economic realities. So it makes sense for us to collaborate and work together with most of the countries out there.
And so you have a cool perspective because you've been in the public sector, you've been in the private sector, and you highlighted something there that, of course, is, again, I think it's core to what CISA is trying to do, but it also represents the big challenge, and that is we have reached a point like no other before that I can remember, at least as long as I've been alive, which, is a few decades here now. Come on. But where the private sector has so much influence on national security. I mean, we've always thought in terms of traditional defenses, defend our borders, nuclear defenses, things like that. And sure, the private sector plays a part in that. But now you mentioned the attacks on things like critical infrastructure and what that means in terms of our homeland security, our national defense. How do you feel we can continue to build and I guess I don't want to say get them to care because I think they care, but how do we continue to get private industry more engaged in that kind of collaborative, national defense strategy?
Yeah, well, I think it's critically. I think critical infrastructure is really making inroads because most of it's owned by the private sector, about 80%. And I think they came to the realization, particularly energy and utilities and others, that they can't do this alone. I mean, the threats are too great and too strong out there. So, I think what we need to do is more awareness, and I think it's really more along small and medium businesses out there, which are really the main business elements of our engine and economic engine in the United States. And most of those companies are still way behind the eight ball when it comes to cybersecurity. They don't realize that their supply chain may be corrupted and they can be taken out and they go out of business so easily, or the reputation marred. So we really need to do outreach, and I think CISA is doing some of it, but I think Congress has finally woke up. There's a lot of initiatives now, and I think in the cyber realm that weren't there a few years ago. They're looking at every industry. They're looking at helping train people in economics, sense of getting jobs in cybersecurity because there's such a dearth of them out there. Retraining people in government. So I think all of that combined, helps a lot. It adds STEM to it, add everything else that we're trying to do. It goes back to the digital age focus. We need to really recruit and get people involved in this area because there's so much depth to it. It's not just communications. It's everything we do. Everything we operate has a digital connection. So we really need a bigger focus.
Sure. So I do feel like we've kind of hit that critical mass. At least let's think just critical infrastructure for a minute. Have we kind of hit that critical mass where you feel like they're a little more motivated at this point? The reason I ask is I look back, on my history as a consultant, and for the better part of a decade, I was working in NERC-CIP and dealing with a lot of the regulations around infrastructure protection, but it never seemed to. It was regulation did what regulation does, right? People just want to whatever I got to do to get you off my back. All right, fine. But there's never that meaningful commitment, or very rarely was there that meaningful commitment to, all right, we really have to secure ourselves. And I feel like maybe I always thought there was like some skepticism on the part of those organizations where they didn't really believe the problem was that worrisome because of traditionally, I mean, you're talking to electricians and so forth, right? I mean, people who, their first thought isn't the cybersecurity world. And so I'm curious now if, how you feel, if you think, that we've gotten over that hump, and is that, if we've gotten over that hump, is it maybe a result of some, pretty prominent news stories now that have shown tangibly what can happen?
Yeah, I'm not sure we've gotten over the hump totally. I mean, I think there's still a lot out there that see compliance as security, it's, check the box kind of thing. But I think that we're more aware of the risks. We've seen what happens in the energy industry, the amount of attacks happening. We saw it happen to Aramco from Iran. We saw that, Russia has been able to take out Ukrainian power plants. So, and satellites. So I think, there's a greater awareness, I think, among the people that are leading those sectors of the economy. And I think there's also a great awareness in government that's now starting to mandate this awareness and involvement. So I think it's not quite there yet, but I think it's going in the right direction. And I'm hopeful that there'll be more. For instance, when I just mentioned satellites, the satellites are not considered critical infrastructure, but yet our communications are more and more of it are going up in around Earth orbit. So, we need to look at that too, the ground stations, the satellites, the vulnerabilities. Everything is vulnerable right now. And so I'm hoping that, now that we're getting a sort of more sober perspective of what the cyber threats are and how dangerous they are, that, you can really focus on filling all these gaps. And there are a lot of them to fill.
And that's, so those that follow me on Twitter know this. You may not know this, Chuck, but I'm a student pilot. And so you talk about satellites not being critical infrastructure. My mind immediately went to thinking about how many aircraft now are reliant on GPS. The GPS system alone, if you lose that system, and the FAA is moving us farther and farther into that world, right? They're actually moving away from ground station based, navigation and so forth, and it's all becoming satellite based. To think about commercial airliners losing their ability to navigate via GPS yeah, are there backup ways? Probably, there are some things, but boy, that's a terrifying thought in of itself.
It certainly is. I think about it every time I fly, actually. But you're right. I mean, not just that, the cyber threats to a lot of the aircraft. I mean, there is so many vulnerabilities. And if you look at this from a security perspective, I mean, you can be up all night. You just look at healthcare, for instance. What could happen in hospitals, since most of them don't have good cybersecurity, and all the medical equipment, is vulnerable. I mean, there's so many things that we need to refocus on in this new era that we've just started to do. And I think the more we get on shows like this, talk about it, the better it is. Because there are bad guys out there. They're going to go for whatever reason, whether it's geopolitical or whether more likely it's financial, which a lot of these hacker criminal gangs are. They're going to go after where they can get you, and we just have too many targets. It's a larger attack surface than it's ever been. It's growing, and with these new technologies, with automation and artificial intelligence, it's easier for them too. So, there's other thing is that they only have to be lucky at one time, out of 1,000 fishes.
Right.
You always have to be vigilant to make sure you're not the one fished.
Yeah, it's one thing I've heard the term tossed around a little bit, and I'm actually surprised more people aren't drawing the parallels between a lot of these cyber attacks and terrorism, right? Like, I've heard the term once or twice, cyber terrorism, and I don't feel like we need to put the word cyber in front of everything to differentiate that it's a digital attack. But I feel like a lot of this is based more in the concepts of terrorism. It's how can I put that threat out there of physical harm? I don't even have to physically harm anybody, right? Yeah. Just that threat or that fear alone allows these criminal elements to do a lot of the things that they do. You think about pipeline getting shut down. Well, that created a whole lot of fear in folks' minds. Maybe not life or death fear, but it certainly had them afraid of what could happen to our economy. And maybe there is some life and death there too if people can't get fuel and things of that nature. And so I'm a little surprised that we don't hear it addressed more in terms of a terrorism act.
Yeah, I think initially, I'm sure DHS is. They're looking at, we've had a lot of attacks on water plants. They've been lone wolves, but for the most part. But we also have attacks on state governments that have taken down Atlanta and Baltimore and other areas of Florida, smaller governments. But this is a very real threat. I just think we just sort of underplay it. And I think what happened recently, you mentioned the pipeline, Colonial Pipeline. I think that was a really good wake-up call because it really took down, like you said, for a week all the energy travel across the East Coast. We weren't sure if it was a geopolitically sponsored attack on OT. It turned out to be an IT attack, but nonetheless, we had to shut down the OT, the operational technology part of it anyway. And that's where it makes it easy for them. They could just go into almost any industrial plant and get through the IT, and then automatically you have to shut down the OT too, because you don't know if it's been cross-pollinated. So I think it was a wake-up call for us to learn that how vulnerable these infrastructures are, and it could be much worse than it happened before, like you said. And it could be our food production, it could be water contamination, it could be our electrical grids. There's a lot of vulnerable infrastructure out there.
Yeah, and you mentioned, as you were talking about that too, state and local government, who really tend to struggle, I think, more than most. In terms of dollars and cents, their budgets are so small. Having again worked in a space where I did a lot of work with those the small and mid-sized governments, that there's a challenge there too. But I'm curious. First of all, have you had the opportunity to work with some of those governments, and what do you see as kind of their biggest challenge?
Yeah. Oh, I have, and I actually testified for a committee a few years ago at DHS on that, on SLED. The biggest challenge is really budget for most of them. They just don't have the budget and the resources. That is the number one thing. That's changed a little because they got a lot of funding in the last federal bill. The other thing is they just don't have the expertise. You're really competing with industry and the best of government to get the best cyber out. So there's other alternatives. I mean, the government could help them manage services, another thing, but state and local has its own unique problems, and I think that's going to take a while for them to build up. But the one thing they can do is protect the crown jewels, particularly if it's citizen records, or if it's certain areas of government that they need to keep away from any kind of intruder. So I'm optimistic that as things go along, that a lot of this will be automated, and some of the lessons learned and shared will be much more integrated within the federal market too, between the state and local. So, but right now, I think we're at a point where things are still in early stages, where there's still a lot of gaps and vulnerabilities for the state and local operations.
Do you feel like maybe there's an awareness component as well? Maybe it's not the top risk, but I think back to a couple higher profile stories. I think about the coal fire consultants who got arrested in Dallas County, and granted, it seemed like they got kind of wrapped up in a little bit of political infighting between the sheriff's department and the judicial branch. But then, more recently, we have the case in Missouri, I believe it was, where we've got a journalist who points out that they were able to discover all of this information on a government website, not doing anything that you or I would consider hacking or unauthorized access to a system. But yet we had this governor who was adamant that he was going to charge this person and with crimes and everything else. Do you feel like that kind of points to maybe that there's even some awareness work that could happen there in the state and local ranks in particular?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, again, they're a new territory. Actually, I think it's the Secretary of States that do a lot of this stuff with cyber, in the budget area. So they really need to start from a whole new launching pad. Just forget, government was behind too. And still is a little behind in some areas, but in terms of best practices, state and locals are not usually communicating much with each other. You also have, like you said, the different local elements. That might be a sheriff, it might be a city that may have their own IT operations, and it's not congruent to what the state is doing. So there's a lot more issues there because they're not as delineated as they are in the federal government. And the RFPs and everything that's done to procure technologies and capabilities is also different. So, it's going to be a bigger challenge to get a lot of these states up. Some of the bigger states, like Texas and others, have strong budgets and they're doing a better job. But for most states, they just have not prioritized cybersecurity.
So what can the private sector do in that case? I mean, what is there, from a private business perspective? I think there's a vested interest from the private sector in improving the quality of cybersecurity in state and local, because we're reliant on them for a lot of infrastructure and other things. What do you see, or do you have thoughts on what maybe private sector can do to try to influence that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think there's in some of the states I've seen it. I think in Virginia, for one, there's now an involvement where they're building cybersecurity advisory boards with industry and government, and they're convening meetings and taking out actions. I think a lot of us states need to follow that action, but I think particularly if you're have a headquarters in the state and you're a big company that's involved with cybersecurity, part of your mission should be to educate and share, with the people around you, particularly your neighbors. So, I think there's a lot of possibilities there. Again, the states have to do the outreach initially, and I think some of them are doing it, but not many. So that's a good area, I think, for an idea for a plan to invigorate cybersecurity among the private and public sectors and states.
So actually, I think we just answered Frank's question. In fact, he kind of put the answer in there. I feel like, okay, so, how do we get different groups to talk to each other? And he mentions that EDU has a great ISAC, the Run ISAC group. And, of course, we have FinISAC and a few others, or FSISAC, excuse me. So I feel like, it's wherever we can look for that collaboration, that that opportunity to share, and almost, I don't want to call it a collaborative that kind of has its own, sense to it, but maybe there is that opportunity to really unite a lot of the efforts of what's going on in private sector and what's going on, in the government, and bring those efforts together, and, more than even just information sharing, but actually work projects together. I think we've started to see some of the ISAC groups do that. I know World Economic Forum has put together a few cybersecurity committees that are focused on ideas like that. I'm curious if you have other thoughts on just how we, I know you kind of covered a lot of it already, but just how do we continue to foster that communication? Uh-oh, we lost your audio. We'll see if it comes back. We may have lost it. For those of you tuning in, this is not the first time we've experienced this today. I think we lost Chuck, but you know what? We're getting down to that time anyway, so it's about time to wrap up, and we've been going for a while. But Chuck, I know you can probably still hear me, so thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to talk with you. Thank you, everybody who's tuned in. This one we will get converted to podcast in a few days. Obviously, the video is available immediately on all the channels. But check out the ITSP website if you want to get access to this episode once it's converted to that audio podcast. Podcasts of the past episodes, and of course, the videos, you'll find those on our usual channels. So, Chuck, thank you for joining us. I'm sorry about the technical challenges. Thank you, everybody, for joining in, and we will see you next time right here on Securing Bridges.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Securing Bridges podcast with Alyssa Miller. If you learned something new and this podcast made you think, then share itspmagazine.com with your friends, family, and colleagues. If you represent a company and wish to associate your brand with our conversations, sponsor one or more of our podcast channels. We hope you will come back for more stories and follow us on our journey. You can always find us at the intersection of technology, cybersecurity, and society.